Welcome to the castle, everybody. This is Nightsaber Z42, and we're back with another part for the future fantasy world building vlog that I'm doing here on the channel. And today we're actually going to be talking about elves. So, we've done humans, we've done dwarves and gnomes, and now it's finally time to get to the very last of the main races that I had envisioned for this whole setting, and that's going to be the elves. Elves are actually going to be separated into three different sub races, factions, I guess you could kind of say. So we're actually going to start with your main typical tropey wood elves. These are the elves that live in the forest. They really do a lot of hunting. They're all about nature and all of that jazz. So these wood elves, they are the main type of elves that live in this setting. They are like the first elves, I guess, in a certain way. And they live on a planet that's kind of like the moon of Endor from Star Wars. Think of it like that. It's all just covered in forest, and wildlife there is very untamed. A lot of the universe's most wild beasts, dangerous beasts, live on this planet, and the Wood Elves have just kind of learned how to go with the flow and tame it. Their buildings are made of trees, but they don't actually carve into the trees. Instead, they have somebody that's, I would probably term them as like a tree whisperer, where they kind of commune with the tree and they shape the tree from within to kind of form these buildings. So if you think about Kashyyyk, how the Wookiees have these huts that are made of wooden and they're like all up in the trees and all of that. It's kind of like that, except it's a little bit more natural because the wood elves actually don't carve into the trees, at least not without consent from the trees themselves, because the trees are they're alive, they're living, and the elves have kind of learned to commune with them, to talk with them. So that brings us to our next point. What are their ships going to look like? Because the elves here, they're high in magic, but they're also very low in technology. They are people that do not like to use technology. The Wood Elves, out of the three, are going to be the group that has the lowest amount of tolerance for technology. So, what would their ships look like? And so, I actually knew exactly what I wanted this to be. And in fact, one of my main inspirations for creating the setting was from, oh my gosh, Saga. So if you've ever read this book, you probably know where I'm going with this. But in Saga, the main protagonists have a ship that they use to kind of fly across the galaxy, and it is actually made of a tree. So all of the elves' ships are actually made of trees in one form or another. And it was actually within the past couple hundred years that a certain wood elf had begun to shape these trees into quote unquote ships to look like ships, because before then you would have ships that just were trees floating around in space, but now you actually have these these sleek looking ships that are just shaped from the trees. And so they're getting a little bit more artistic with it, because the elves, they're very artsy kind of a people. They like music and literature and theater and all of that. And so I think a natural progression would be that, there would be this one wood elf who's kind of like the, oh gosh, you're really showing my music history here. Stradivarius. They're kind of like the Stradivarius. There's a elf who is like the Stradivarius of that universe, who created these ships, these really high-end ships, and he shaped them to kind of look, just to kind of like be artsy with them. And so now you no longer have these trees just floating out in space. They actually look kind of a little bit like sleek-looking ships. And so planet-wise, we've already talked about their main planet, which the name is still pending, but the elves are ecology-minded, so that means when they actually grow trees or plants or flowers and stuff like that, they do it out of passion, out of love for nature, which is kind of indicative for like pretty much all fantasy tropes, I believe. And so the buildings are, of course, shaped from the trees. And so technology-wise, these wood elves do not really embrace technology all that much. And so their classes are going to be restricted to that, but they are very high in magic. They're like going to be your druids and wizards of this whole setting. FTL is actually non-existent, and so we're having to think of a way to get elves from like a certain system to a different system because they are explorers as well. And so one of the things that I had always wanted to do is actually have elves kind of shape a portal from one point to another point, and so their ship would actually go through the portal and end up somewhere else, kind of like teleportation in a way. And so elves are actually going to use magic to kind of basically teleport from one place to another. I think there's a spell in 5th edition that lends itself to that, where you create a portal and you go through it and you teleport to another point. So it's pretty much like that, only on a larger scale. Culture wise, elves are, they tend to keep to themselves, although they are explorers, or rather, they tend to keep to their own kind. They are often peaceful, but they are intolerant of disrespect or impoliteness in a way. And marriages are through soulmates, and they are very heterosexual people here. There are very few gay or bisexual um, uh, couples in among these wood elves. So politics wise, I was thinking of something along the lines of the Lord of the Rings, where there might be like a council, although I'd have to do a little bit more research into that. But I do want there to be a council for these wood elves, that only the oldest and wisest of the elves would actually kind of congregate and, you know, dictate laws for their peoples, or just discuss how intergalactic trade would work and stuff like that. And in fact, for intergalactic diplomacy, they would elect the oldest or the wisest elf among them to kind of sit on that seat, if I decide to go with that. And so something that I think is very unique for the elves as a whole, at least for the wood elves and the next one that we're going to talk about, is that they're going to be world shapers. And what that means is they have something called the life seed, that they would travel around to different planets and they would plant this life seed, which would grow and shape that world into something more habitable. So let's say that the elves are actually the terraformers of the galaxy. And so these elves actually have done this only a couple of times, because the whole process is actually very lengthy. And you know, elves can live upwards to like 700 years or something like that if you're talking about 5th edition. I would even go on to say that they could probably live like 1,000 years in this universe, just to kind of give them that whole breadth of experience. But they go around to these planets and they plant this life seed, which changes terraforms the entire world. Very unpredictable. And in fact, one of their very first attempts at this actually yielded something a little bit unexpected, and that was an intelligent species. And this species is kind of like the Sylvari from Guild Wars 2. It's a plant people. It's a non-binary plant people, is the best way that I can explain it. And so that was one of their first attempts. Their second attempt is actually the second people that we're going to talk about, which are the Ice Elves. They actually shaped an entire planet, an entire ice planet, to be more habitable. And so, actually, let's talk about them real quick. Ice Elves, so like I said, in the early days of their exploration, these elves actually went out and they planted their life seed all over to different planets. And within their own system, they had found a planet that was on the edge of their system, which would explain why it's called, I guess it would be along the lines of Neptune, about that certain distance. And so they actually planted their life seed and they grew it and they cultivated it and to something that was akin to something like Hoth, but it's not just a massive tundra. There's actually going to be flora. There's going to be plants and trees, just in a different kind of a way that you would normally find in like a forest. It's all going to be habitable for, like, you know, ice or a cold climate, a very cold climate. So this planet is going to have a series of caves that the elves would live in, you know, for their protection. But even within these cities, I'm thinking of like Land of the Lost, where you kind of step in and you would see like all of this flora, like waterfalls somewhere down in there and stuff like that. It'd be really interesting to have a different take on a cold ice planet that's just not, Hoth. Just ice everywhere and snow everywhere, and that's all you get, kind of like a desert. So technology is going to be the same as the Wood Elves, but they're a little bit more accepting of, outside influences just for the sake of survival because they are in a very cold habitat. So they're going to need that extra resource. And so on this planet, you're also going to see some beasts, and I'm thinking of Lost Planet type vibes where you have these big hulking beasts, that kind of live on the planet as well. And this would have been shaped, or, they might have actually been on the planet before they terraformed it, but I'm thinking that these beasts were a result of the terraforming. The culture is also going to be similar to the Wood Elves, so history, magic, property is going to be passed down through the family this time around. So they're a very family-centered culture here. And the only thing that I would say is that in terms of politics, that wouldn't be the case. They wouldn't pass down, their leadership through family. They would have been elected. And in fact, the politics between the Wood Elves planet and the Ice Elves planet is actually going to be kind of one and the same, where they're actually working together. They have an alliance, let's just say. Their religion is actually going to be the same as the Wood Elves, and I never really got into it, but there's going to be a lot of gods and goddesses. Basically, like in your typical Sword Coast or Faerun type Wood Elves, they would believe in some things like, harvesting and sun god and stuff like that. So very typical. And these these Ice Elves aren't really much of the world shapers as the Wood Elves are. So there is also, we're also getting rid of that aspect of them. I would say that they're going to be more sturdy, more hardy, more huntery in a way because they have, they have to survive out in this cold planet. Although they are a little bit more adaptable to different regions as well. Like if an ice elf actually goes to a different planet, they would be able to adapt easily. And so something that I really wanted to do is kind of differentiate between the two or the three different types of elves. And, skin color is going to come into play because when you're thinking of different cultures and the different regions that they come to, they're going to have different skin colors. So for an ice elf, they're going to have like light blue or blue type of skin. And a wood elf is going to be probably about your typical, tanned kind of skin or fair skin, I guess. So let's talk about the third type of elf, the drow. Of course, we have to have drow if we're going to have elves because they're kind of like the dark elves in a way. So their home planet is actually on a moon, somewhere within the system, although I would like to say that they're kind of hidden away, although they're going to be like your pirates of this part of the galaxy. They like technology and they want to have the best technology available. So they're actually going to go around and, take it. Their ships are going to be some amalgamation of a tree mixed in with technology. They are very magical, just like their wood elves and ice elf brethren. And they can actually live underground or even above ground. So they embrace technology and they like to combine magic and tech. And they're also pirates. So culture, I'm thinking of something like R.A. Salvatore's Menzoberranzan. You're going to have that kind of twisted society where only the strongest can survive, and it's a very matriarchal society. But in a way, if you're weak or if you show weakness, you're going to get torn to pieces very quickly. Or at least indentured or enslaved. So their religion is they're actually going to worship some sort of a dark god who tainted or guided these elves into this moon or this dark moon, and ritualistic sacrifices are the norm, whether it's from weak outsiders or weak drow. So there is that. And I know that Wizards of the Coast is going through that time where they are going to want to consolidate, like the Drow, make them misunderstood. But I think having something like this is also can also be beneficial to a setting. You know, it just makes a character like Drist, who actually escaped the norms of his people, that much more impactful. And so I think that still having, I wouldn't say an evil race, but I would say a race that has different or dramatically, extremely different culture than the rest of the galaxy, and just having them, you know, having them the way that they are, it makes characters like player characters that actually escape that norm a little bit more impactful. So in terms of politics, only the strongest are fit to rule, and only the strongest survive. And of course, as I said before, they are a very matriarchal society. They are not world shapers at all, and they do not have access to the life seed because they live on a dark moon. Although their colonies are usually on moons or on ships, so they travel around ships and they pirate as a group. And wherever they decide to settle, there's only one rule, and that there is no sunlight. So that is what I have for the elves. We have three different types of elves: the wood elves, the ice elves, and then the drow. And so this is actually the end of the first part of this series. I've gone through different aspects like history and developing or giving out the basics of a couple of different races, so humans, elves, dwarves, and gnomes. So we have at least four different species that have been generalized. And now the next step is actually going to be to flesh out those four, get some systems developed. Like magic is going to be the next thing that I do because I have an idea for that, and also psionics. So I'm going to have those two different systems fleshed out. But I also kind of wanted to point out that I'm following the collaborative world building for writers and gamers. I actually just finished this past weekend, and a lot of the not concepts, but the way that I do things is actually based off of this book. So if I'm actually going off of what this book has been about, I am kind of just really finished the framework of this setting. And that's really the first part. So there's three different parts. The first is the framework where you develop your scope, your sequence, and perspective. And also some of the very basics of the setting, which I've had for the four main races. Those were part of my whole basics. And now I'm actually going to start thinking about the structure and substructures of this setting. So that would be governance, economic, social relations, cultural influences, and magic, which would be an additional substructure. That's the part of the phase that I'm moving on to next. So magic and psionics would kind of be under that structures and substructures, and then very quickly after that we're going to be talking about the governments between the different races, economics, and social relations, and all of that. And then the third part is the catalog, where I say, okay, so we have this event, or this race, and we start really fleshing things out even more. And so getting that stuff into the World Anvil for you guys to read through and, maybe take or borrow and stuff like that. And that's really all there is. So this is a pretty big milestone. It's like part one of the first part of the overall process, because I'm not going to do all of the framework at this moment, because then I think I'd get burned out pretty quickly. I want to move on and start developing what I have and getting that fleshed out, because this is the main part, and then getting all the extra stuff fleshed out at a later time. So thank you guys so much for watching. I do not really have well, actually, I can come up with a question real quick. I would say, how would you develop psionics in this setting? My second question would be, what system would you use for this game, like 5th edition Pathfinder or Starfinder? maybe some OSR system that I haven't heard of, like oh, what is it called? Stars Without Numbers. So what system would you use? And I guess how would magic work? Which I kind of have an idea of what I want for that as well. But I would like to get some input from you guys. Like, what would you think? Because you might actually influence, you might have an idea that kind of fits that I can take or even rework into the setting. So those are my three questions. How does psionics work? How does magic work? And what setting would you use? And there we go. And of course, we're still working on government, so if you want to throw some government tips my way, that'd also be cool. I'm actually going to start doing research on interesting governments in throughout media, so like Star Wars, Star Trek, and stuff like that, but also real world examples of some things that might be unique that, might be out there that I can take and rework a little bit. So that's where I'm at for that, which is why that video is going to be coming out in a few weeks. Plus, also work is starting, so I'm going to have to really start being picky about what my content's going to be and working on it way ahead of time. So feel free to leave a comment down below, give this video a huge thumbs up to support this series, and subscribe if you would like to see more. I will see you guys in the next video.